Welcome. This is the podcast series dedicated to living a revenue culture. A revenue culture is achieved when you have maximized profits because you optimized your people in a revenue science context. So today, we normally have guests. Today, we're not going to have a guest. We got some really good ones coming up in the future. But we're going to talk about some of the fundamentals of what it takes to live a revenue culture. And one of them is we need to have common language. It's hard to optimize your culture if people don't always have the same language, the same words, they don't have the same metrics. It's hard to collaborate or align if they don't know what everybody's talking about. And your flow is difficult without alignment and collaboration. And sometimes those problems are caused by myths. Now, we're going to talk about something today that I'm sure all of you are really familiar with. It's MVP. Now, if you're a sports fanatic, you're probably thinking of MVPs in the Super Bowl or the NBA All-Star game. That's not what we're talking about. Those of you who have been entrepreneurs or investors or you've been responsible for product launches or new product development, you're familiar with MVP in a different way. So we're going to explore MVP today because it's one of those things that I think creates, as you know, in revenue science, we measure the cost of chaos. And I think the way most of us address MVP, we're really adding to the chaos, and we're not nearly getting the kinds of benefits out of it that we could. So let's start on MVP. What does it mean? If we take this out of sports context and we put it in business, we're talking about minimally viable product. Now, those words are important. Particularly viable and product. If we think about getting new products into the market, and into the market means they get in so somebody actually buys them and pays enough that the seller can afford to keep putting them in the market and support them long term and have enough left over to develop the replacement products for them. So a viable product is important. But in that conversation, there's some myth. The myth is the myth around product. I don't know how many of you are aware, and I hope you all are, and I'm just preaching to the choir, but you can't buy or sell a product or a service. Can't be done. So when we talk about minimal viable product, we must be talking about the fact this is a product that works technically. It works as designed. That means if it's software and you press load, it loads and it comes up and you can put your password in and it actually starts to do things. And the things it starts to do are what you hoped it would do. And it actually grabs data or processes data, files data. It does those technical things that products are supposed to do. If it was a physical product, it would, it'd light up, it would clean things, it would do whatever it is it was physically supposed to do. It may not be pretty. It may have some hiccups or glitches or be a little slower than it was intended, but it basically is viable. You can see this is what we set out to do. Now, products can't be bought or sold until they're turned into offers. Because I can't buy any product or contract for any service unless I know there is a contract. There is a price. The price is in US dollars, and I'll either take my American Express card or I have to bring cash. The product, in order to be sold, has to have this whole offer structure around it so that the buyer knows what they're getting, they know what it's going to accomplish, they know how it's going to be serviced, maintained, onboarded, whatever those key words are. And if you think about it for a second, the product is this physical thing or this digital thing. And now the offer is about how the buyer interacts with this. So we got this kind of dualism going on. On one hand, we built something, the seller built something. On the other side, the buyer's trying to figure out if this is valuable enough for me to give you money, and if it is really something that I can expect to get value out of, and I got to decide short-term, long-term, enough value to justify the price. There's all that stuff going on both sides. So we think about MVP in the business world, and I think people get confused. They believe that when they say minimum viable product, they're actually thinking, well, that must include messaging, and it must include the look and feel, and the packaging, and the pricing, and the fact it fits the ideal buyer who we've really perceived as the one who's going to be standing there waiting for this to come out. And we believe that an MVP is going to tell us enough about contracting and market value and short-term considerations and long-term considerations that people are going to make an investment in it, whether that investment's from a VC or a private equity group or from our own corporation just deciding to put more funds in to take this to the next level. I think that's really at a point where we should do a timeout and we should ask ourselves, maybe there's a transition here. Maybe this is a transition from the headquarters out. We invested to try and create a product because we believe there may be individuals or organizations out there, they're going to want to buy it. We think we know enough about the buyer community that we should develop this because we can develop it and we're pretty sure they want it. But I think there's a transition here. I think the MVP should be transitioned to an MVO, minimal viable offer. Because the product obviously has to work. It obviously has to create some value. But typically the people who design the product, who build it, may not be the ones to figure out how to take it to market. Offers are about value transfer. They're about value transfer between parties. And the design and the early validation is about how that offer gets from headquarters out into the market to the ideal buyer to get onboarded, installed, utilized, deployed, whatever it is it needs to do, and make enough value transfer to the buyer that they're willing to pay enough that it's worth it for the seller. I don't think that's part of product development. I think that's something completely separate. And I think when we allow the language around revenue generation to get confused, I think that starts to create chaos and that starts to create problems. Offers are all about messaging. They're all about understanding what the buyer's world is like, understanding how the seller can complement that buyer's world, transfer value to that buyer's world that the buyer can't get a better option anywhere else. It does have look and feel. It does have obviously pricing and packaging. And there's a big difference between just everybody out there in the market that might buy it and the ideal buyer that we really want to focus on because we have limited resources. They have limited resources. We want to spend our time with ideal buyers who will look at what we're doing and say, wow, this is cool, and I'm glad to pay for it. Offers are all about the value in the market and thinking about both short-term and long-term. When you're doing a minimum viable product, even if you're thinking about it more as an offer, you typically are thinking very much short-term. And in today's world, there's some requirements based on changes that are going on where short-term, obviously it's important, it's survival. But long-term is really the name of the game. We need to make investments today that allow us to make a profit today, but set us up for highly leveraged long-term business where we become a partner. We become the provider of this kind of solution in the industry, where people look at us and say, I want to be part of that. That's that revenue culture piece. So when we think about an MVO, we're thinking about how do we tie a whole bunch of things together. It's not just the product. The product's one element of all the things that have to be tied together. Of course, it's packaging and pricing and contracting and market, short-term, long-term, but it's also partners. Who else do we need to install this? It's about buyers. How are our buyers changing? So that maybe today they do business with us for this reason, but our long-term offer design says they want where we're going in the future. And once we start down that path together, we become partners in developing that future. So the offer is this whole, it's that whole context that we started out talking about. It's the whole revenue science context to tie all the pieces together, which include our cash availability, our capital, our staff, our future staffing, all of those things, the national politics, the politics inside our organization, all of those things end up being part of the offer. And I don't think there's any MVP that does that stuff. So it's this opportunity to let the MVP be what it was intended to be, and that's a viable product that can be converted into a viable offer. And when we blur what an MVP is, I'm sure it increases the cost of the chaos, it increases the risk of failure, and it probably damages our brand. Because when we bring a half-baked product out and represent it as it's ready for the market, it's ready to be buyer back, it's ready to be about value transfer, I don't think it was ever intended to be that. And when we come out and let people think that's what we were doing, and they see that it's clearly not up to their standards, that's going to hurt our brand long term. So we want to make sure that we're not blurring these things and that we're going to optimize. And part of that optimizing is unify and align all the silos in the company. So when we think about that transition from MVP, the product that's developed by the product team, and some of our other silos are participating, marketing certainly, probably finance. As we make this transition to an MVO, we need almost every part of the organization behind this. And they all need to speak the same language. They need to understand the same value. They need to be focused on the right long-term partners and long-term ideal buyers. So, let's think about making this transition so that we can be more what we really set out to be, more of a living a revenue culture by optimizing our people inside a context that makes it smooth and easy. We don't pretend we sell products and services. We pretend that we deliver value-added offers to buyers who are passionate, as we are, about getting that solution in their business to make their world better. So, as you think about this, if you get new ideas or you want to challenge the ones I put out, please do that. Please let me know. Because I think this is something that's really important. And it's something that, starting right now, all of you listening can participate in rolling this out either in your own company or in your own business or in your own role, because it's really about clear definition of the difference between headquarters, out, invested product design and development, hopefully with the intent of solving a buyer problem, and then turning that idea, that product, that service now into a minimal viable offer that can actually be tested in the real world. And as fast as our world's changing today, every one of us is involved in that a little bit or a lot. So this is something you can start to apply immediately. You can start to work across the silos. And those silos don't have to be just internal, they're internal and external, to get everybody unified around how to create the greatest value from the offer possible So the buyer is applying that in their world and compensating us as the seller. So I want to thank you for joining us today. And if you, by the way, if you haven't read our book, Smart Rev, I really do recommend it. The book is really good. And it's very much aligned with everything we do on this podcast. So I hope you get your hands on it. I'd love to have feedback. In our podcasts or our blog series, we are doing a Q&A basically around questions about the book. So you can leave the podcast and jump over to the blog and, expand your book understanding. And if there's anything we can do for you, please reach out, let us know. We certify CROs, we certify organizations to think and act like CROs would wish that we did. And I do a lot of kind of a revenue guide, work with senior leaders and boards to examine their decisions coming up from a revenue science standpoint to make sure every decision is going to maximize the revenue. And if there's anything else you need that you think we can help with, please reach out. And if not, I will see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks for joining us.